In this series, we're looking at 5 pieces of evidence that are key in the search for the truth of whether Jesus really did rise from the dead. So here's piece of evidence number 1, the empty tomb. You know, I think this is one of the most compelling reasons of evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, that the tomb in which he'd been buried was empty. The fact that Jesus' burial site was found empty by his followers on the 3rd day after his crucifixion, well, that can't easily be explained away. Firstly, you see, an empty tomb was clearly something that the first followers of Jesus believed in. The early Christian beliefs and traditions that were passed along include an empty tomb. And you know, just 15 to 20 years after the death of Jesus, one of the first converts to this new Christian movement, a guy called Paul, wrote a letter to a bunch of people living in Corinth. And he says this, "For what I received, I passed on to you as that of first importance, that Christ, that is Jesus, died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the 3rd day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Peter and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have died." That was Paul writing just 15 to 20 years after the events of that first Easter. And by the way, to have some sort of historical document dated to within that close to the events that it actually recorded, well, that's almost unheard of in those times. Just a few years after Jesus' death, there were a whole bunch of people who believed that Jesus had risen from the dead, that the tomb was empty, and that they had seen him. They clearly believed it. Secondly, second piece of evidence for an empty tomb, you know, the site of Jesus' burial, the site of that tomb was really well known to the first followers of Jesus and also to the Jewish religious leaders and the Roman authorities of the day. And they would have wanted to disprove the resurrection. They really did want to disprove that. If that tomb hadn't been empty, it would have been impossible for a movement founded on the belief in the resurrection to have come into existence in the same city as that burial site. That same city where Jesus had been publicly executed and buried. But that, Jerusalem, was where the movement started. And if anybody had wanted to disprove the resurrection or squash this new movement, all they would have had to have done was to demonstrate that the tomb wasn't empty. And there was huge incentive for the Jewish religious leaders and the Roman authorities of the day to want to do that, to squash that movement. But they couldn't. Thirdly, in the very earliest Jewish accounts of this period, there was nobody who claimed that the tomb still contained Jesus' body. Nobody did that. The question, even in those earliest Jewish accounts, was what happened to the body, not that the body had gone. Fourth piece of evidence for an empty tomb, well, it's the fact that it was a group of women who were first to discover it. If you were making this story up, it would have been really embarrassing for the disciples to have admitted that, because in that culture 2,000 years ago, women were considered to be second-class citizens and they wouldn't have been believed. So you would never have gone to that first as though being the first people to encounter the resurrected Jesus. Now, skeptics have proposed various theories to explain the empty tomb, such as a theft of the body or a misplacement of the body. But we have to ask ourselves, if that's the route we want to go down, well, who benefits from that? Who benefits from a theft or a misplaced body? Certainly not the disciples. If they'd stolen the body to make up this whole story, why would they have gone on to keep that lie all the way to their own deaths? Because many of them died for their belief in Jesus' resurrection. Or if somebody else had stolen it or misplaced it, why wasn't it ever found? There were so many people who had a reason to want that body to be discovered, to disprove the resurrection, that surely with so many people wanting to do that, if the body had simply been misplaced, well, it would have been found and discovered and shown to everybody. None of those theories, other theories for the empty tomb, can fully or reasonably account for it. So we're left with the question, if the tomb was empty, where did the body go? And maybe there was no body because Jesus had come back to life.